Situation is the vast majority of professional services firms are between $1 and $10 million in revenue, whether that's recurring revenue or reoccurring or project-based revenue. That typically, if you also look at a professional services firm, you typically have a bit of a triangle model. You have partners of the firm, which are typically responsible for two things: revenue generation and IP, net new IP generation. And then you have associates kind of pouring down, doing the rest of the deliverables. Welcome to Outsource to Profits. I want to introduce a great guest. I want Brian to introduce himself so everybody understands who he is, and then we're going to set the situation for today's episode. Brian, introduce yourself to the audience.
Yeah, thanks, Jamie. Appreciate it. Hello, everyone. My name is Brian Kerlin. I'm the founder and CEO of a company called Optitude. We're based here in the United States in the Denver, Colorado market, and starting the company about over 6 years ago. Our major focus is to help first-time founders in the professional services space build their revenue and capacity for more predictable growth. And we've been at it for quite a while. And my background is in sales and business development space for over 2 decades. So I think we have a lot to talk about. I know we have a short time, so we'll get to it. Thanks, Jamie.
Fantastic. So I'll set the situation. Situation is the vast majority of professional services firms are between $1 and $10 million in revenue, whether that's recurring revenue or reoccurring or project-based revenue. That typically, if you also look at a professional services firm, you typically have a bit of a triangle model. You have partners of the firm, which are typically responsible for two things: revenue generation and IP, net new IP generation. And then you have associates kind of pouring down, doing the rest of the deliverables. So you now have owners of the firm doing the lead generation, the sourcing, the winning of new customers. And typically they start to fall apart at 2 million, at 3 million, at 5 million, because they're being stretched so thin. So if you don't mind touching upon, where are you seeing the biggest inflection point, whether it's the size of growth, number of employees, where do the wheels fall off the track, so to speak, typically? And what are the early warning signs? That's what we're going to start with. We're going to dive into the problem, then we're going to dive into solutions. If you're an agency owner, how do you self-diagnose that you are now at the moment where your capacity is the absolute reason you are not growing?
Yeah, great question. I think the key is self-diagnosis is hard, right? I mean, I think all of us would argue as leaders of our businesses that, there's a lot of different metaphors that are used, but, it's trying to read the label from inside the bottle is extremely difficult.
My business partner uses that exact same all the time.
I mean, I think it's easy to understand, right? I think one of the challenges of the first-time founders who we specifically try to work with the most is they've gotten to a point of growth or a consistent amount of growth where they've kind of reached that second stage, which is post-startup. They've been in the market. They're delivering great value to their clients. We tend to see that show up on average between a 1 and 5 million in top line revenue. In the professional services space, though, the unique challenge I think that everyone has is they built that sort of consultancy on their likely expertise, or them and a few other people's expertise. And with that expertise comes a network of individuals that they could leverage and lean on to kind of start the ball rolling. Surprisingly enough, the companies that we see that fall into this challenge are not 2-3 years old. I mean, they're usually 5, 8. We've had clients work that are 20 plus years in business, and they've kind of got stuck in that spot. So I guess the simplest way to answer your question is, I think an outside perspective is always valuable to help people kind of see what they could be running into, as long as that founder and CEO realize there is a challenge with predictable revenue growth over time, and they just can't see the path forward.
If you were to look at all your customers you've served and looked at the market, if you were to be able to diagnose where the vast majority, I'm going to tell you what my opinion is going to be, but I want to hear yours. If you were to dive into 10 agencies, statistically, what percentage would be made up of what is the root cause problem, the reason why they've hit that growth inflection point, struggling to jump from founder-led sales to a scaled sales-led sales?
Yeah, fair question. I definitely don't think it's one thing, but I will kind of acquiesce to the fact that there is a pattern, right? So I'd be looking forward to hearing your response. But in general, there is no sort of system and process that's even modified or partially put together behind the founder or the partners that are leading the revenue generation. So there's a lot of networking that's happened, a lot of repeat customers, which is excellent, but there's nothing that's shown any pattern recognition of where are those types of customers, what are the specific customers that are the best for us in their particular business, and what system and process did we use to acquire them? What steps did we take? What technology did we leverage? Usually none of that, or very limited parts of that, are built, or even in a place where we can leverage it and go out and start to build it inside the organization. And that usually sets up to be a significant challenge. And the symptoms of that show up in a number of different ways.
Actually, before I give you my opinion, actually a question on that question. What percentage of your customers, when you walk in, are not doing something just like you and I are doing right now, contributing to their inbound content marketing machine? I'd love to know, from your opinion, 0 to 10 million in ARR or just revenue. You were talking about a repeatable prospecting system. While this is not direct prospecting, it contributes to inbound lead flow. What percentage of customers are you kind of baffled that they're not writing newsletters, they're not making podcasts, they're not doing webinars and so forth?
Yeah, I mean, we tend to think of that as called thought leadership, right? I mean, there's an expertise they have, or at least they position themselves as a consultancy in the market, and that has to be out there in the world outside of their network, right? Which is what we started off talking about. And I'd say, I'm just taking a really broad brush. I don't have the data in front of me. I'd say 50% or more don't have a more consistent pattern of how to communicate thought leadership to the market. I think it's very tactical, which is a great, you got to start somewhere. But when you look at the comprehensive way to deliver thought leadership, especially in today's world with social media and technology, understanding where those customers are, I think it's probably at the top of the list that needs to be a focus for clients in the professional services space.
Interesting. Okay, so I'm going to give you my thoughts. And this is going to give you a little quick history lesson. So 10, 12 years ago, I got really fortunate that I saw through the tea leaves, I saw around a corner, and I saw the emergence of LinkedIn when it was 50 million users. And I created a sales methodology that I then called social selling. And just for whatever reason, that Google term, that Google trend caught on. And it was a sales methodology that just made sense because it was a divergence from where people were struggling on cold calling and emailing, and sales organizations were looking for something different. And along comes this modern digital social thing. So anyways, long and the short is I was able to scale it to multi-millions, but then I capped at 3 million because it was founder-led sales. So I give that history because my whole career had been centered around enablement as a particular solution to solving that problem. And it absolutely does. Average seller would increase their yield over a course of a year, somewhere between 5 and 20%. It just depended on which group we were enabling and so forth. But that was meaningful why we went after mid-market and enterprise customers at scale. Another option that took hold and became very popular in the last 10 years is sales tools. Everybody got a tool. I've helped customers do audits of their own tech stack, their sales tech stack. I had one customer that had 3 CRMs and 48 other tools for every seller. Each seller had 48 tools. So that then leads to my new bias. My new bias is that I'm writing a book. The kind of the basis of it, I call it pod selling, is around time management. I actually, if you look at statistically, the percentage of sellers not making quota, there was a company called Topo that got purchased by Gartner, and they were measuring the sellers that weren't making their quota. So Gartner was doing studies on the sellers that were making their quota, the percentage of them. And Topo was doing the inverse, and they were interviewing the sellers not making their quota. And what they found was that time management, 83% of sellers, when they chalked it up to the biggest problem they were having, they were being asked to do too much. So my bias is around that sellers are doing way too many tasks that are non-accretive, that they are not revenue generating, they're administrative. Now, of course, this podcast being outsourced to profits, that's a natural solution, is sales support. But what is when you're getting inside an organization, you just mentioned founders do not have a repeatable process. They go to networking events. They don't have a standard operating procedure of which events they go to, what ICPs they talk to, how they run events. They just go and leads follow them. Do you mind kind of commenting on the time management piece? Are you going into organizations and are you seeing just a complete waste of time of everybody doing, I call it $5 an hour tasks? Maybe just add any thoughts on that.
Yeah.
And then we can talk about going back to sales methodologies as another solution as well.
Yeah, no, I think it's great because a lot of times people look for a silver bullet strategic answer, and what you're kind of touching on, and we believe 100% here at Optitude, and even foundationally, the principle in which we coach, train, and lead our clients is built on one of those sub factors, which is time. We refer to it as capacity. So the inside up principle is a principle we founded the organization on, and it only a lot of organizations talk about revenue and profit, which we talk about as performance, but capacity together have to happen in simultaneous growth, which is what I think you're inferring, which is if you don't have a focus on where you're spending your time at the founder level specifically and everyone else through the organization relative to revenue, then you are limiting the chances for you to get any leverage at all or any ways to build what we call future capacity inside the organization. And so as we believe the founder and leader, if they don't see that, then the organization will always stall out where the founder and leader has that challenge. And so 100% agree with you. And it's something we do and teach and coach in our training, and as well as our one-on-one activity with small client boutique.
Tell me a little bit more about the enablement work that you do with your customers. How do people get a hold of you? What are organizations you're best fit for? We'd love to learn a little bit more for the audience. How do you best serve your customers?
Yeah, thanks for that question. I mean, at the end of the day, we're a small boutique consulting firm that focuses on really helping build the founder and CEO's capacity for future growth in performance, which is obviously revenue, profit, and top line, as well as capacity. And we believe wholeheartedly they have to happen together. And that's what makes us unique here at Optitude. We do small one-on-one projects. We're very limited in that group because we only take kind of the best clients that have that particular urgent problem that we want to work with. And we're lucky enough to be able to make those choices. And then the second is we've done more a one-to-many approach, which is two different methods. One is our online virtual academy, which is live through training for about 3 to 4 months. And it's small parts of what we train each week that get operationally implemented inside of an organization. And we offer that a couple times a year, select times. And we recently launched our online self-paced course, which is similar content and information, but has all the regiments needed for the founder and CEO to kind of block off time, as we talk about time, to do the work on their business in this particular area. And then our community of experts help them through accountability, guidance, and mentoring to make sure that they're future-proofing their business.
You know what I think the audience would love to hear is your time management hacks. Describe perhaps what I call it the will. What does ideal look like?
Sure.
What does your will of a week look like for yourself? Are you doing founder-led sales or do you have sales-led sales?
We have sales-led sales. I'm also involved based on the size of our organization. So it's kind of a partial. I kind of get to the end of that conversation with some clients, but it's worked out really well for us. As far as the conversation about how I think about time and operationalizing and maximizing and leveraging it, gosh, it probably started. Before I started the organization, really around focus on how I set up my entire year. I know that's going to sound corny to maybe some people, but I believed.
Hey, I have a friend, Dan Martell, that builds it his year on the January 1st. His whole year is organized.
Yeah. I mean, I don't know Dan, but I follow him on a lot of the social media channels. He's absolutely got a story that's worth learning more about if you haven't followed Dan. But I guess in some ways, maybe a similar approach. I start out the entire year with understanding all of the core goals and opportunities I have in a number of different buckets, not only in business, but in personal life. There's a lot of nuance there, but in general, we start off that way. And then I break down each of those sort of yearly goals into quarters, and then quarters into months, months into weeks. And I tend to use, I have been, I guess, more consistently, a journal approach. And what I mean by is we have a journal called the Inside Out Principle Journal, which obviously what we just talked about. And it's really to get you to focus. I focus my time on the Sundays before the week starts on what did I accomplish in the previous week relative to what I said I was going to try to do. I prioritize and self-stack 3 main priority projects that have to get done. So if I think about what I'm doing the rest of the week, there's always way more than that happening. But I have 3 particular things that I know by Sunday before the day, into that evening, I know what those priorities are for the week. I block and schedule those with my executive assistant into the calendar and make sure that I have time to work on those particular priorities. And then I fill in the rest with what I know is important tasks or client-facing interaction, or et cetera, to make sure that we get the results and performance we want week over week. It doesn't stop there, but the pattern of that is week by week and day by day, and restacking, making sure those priorities are clear, and then we repeat. We go through the same sort of process every week. We use the journal on Sunday. We look at that journal every single day for 10 to 15 minutes in the morning, and then we use that to kind of manage our calendar through a calendar tech platform that everyone probably has their own. And then we go through and kind of maximize that over weeks and months. And then we check in. We have a check-in quarterly. We have check-in every 30 days, 90 days. And that's really how we manage our time.
Wow. Okay. So now that is a way, Brian, for you to teach your customers time management. Mine is not nearly as sophisticated as that, but that is fantastic. The only pieces that I would add is on a very tactical level. So I have a virtual assistant who reads all my emails and manages my calendar. I was told years ago, email is other people's priorities, not your own. And so I'm not a slave to my own email and calendar system. With that, in my week design, my Mondays are for internal for my businesses. Think of them as like talking about the rocks for the week and then going through departmental meetings. My Monday afternoons is content development day. So I'm sitting in front of a video camera making content. I record 2 podcasts. Some I bleed out throughout the rest of the week, like we're doing today. We're filming this on a Tuesday. And then on Fridays as well, I take no outside calls. So on Mondays and Fridays, there are no outside calls. And there's, I think it's called the Archimedes effect, Archimedes theorem.
Okay.
And essentially, it's like, where do your best ideas come from an intellectual property standpoint? The shower, the toilet, on a swim. It's when your mind, and I had a friend who was doing his PhD thesis on this back during the BlackBerry days. His thesis was that these things are actually destroying innovation in the Americas because when we're constantly on them, we're not letting our brain relax. And it's when our brain relaxes that the best intellectual property comes. I look at my time as an entrepreneur, and the vast majority of the great innovations that we've come up with were invented on a walk or in my boat or, like sitting on the dock because my mind can relax. So that's why on Fridays, No one gets in my calendar. And it's a day where it's amazing. Thursday night, I find myself relaxing. I wake up Friday and the ideas just start pouring in. And I work on big rocks, big chunky initiatives, or I'm inventing something new. Anyway, so from a tactical standpoint, that's what I do. Brian, anything you want to add before?
I think it's impressive. I mean, whether it's your method, whether it's Dan's, or something like what we do at Optitude here. At the end of the day, it's the easiest thing to talk about having to focus and manage, which is our time, but it's the hardest, I believe, to execute, especially if you're leading an organization and you're trying to grow and scale, because it feels like you don't have enough time. And the real conundrum is that is what you and I think, and anyone else that's really, really good at this. And I wouldn't consider myself great. I feel like I'm always learning. I feel like we're good. Is making sure you realize you have 100% of the choice on where you use your time and spend your time. But if you're not clear on the goals you're trying to accomplish, then your time will start feeling like it's everyone else's, and you will feel exhausted. You will get burned out. And all the things. I'm sure we could continue a different conversation at a different time. But I think you're right on about that.
Fantastic. Well, it was great having you on the show. And how do people get a hold of you?
Yeah, thanks, Jamie. The best way to get a hold of me is use LinkedIn. I'm obviously on LinkedIn. It's Brian Kerlin, Kerlin, here in Denver, Colorado, or in our website or social, optitude.co.
Fantastic. Thank you so much.
Thanks, Jamie. Good talking to you. Good seeing you.
Thank you. Bye-bye.